name is Hazel Weakly. I have thoughts, lots of thoughts. They never stop thinking, they never stop thinking. Today, we're going to talk about how to hire engineering force multipliers. So it turns out that the secret is, and stop me if you've heard this before, hire smart people. Get out of the way. If that works for you, great, you can leave. So as for everybody else, well, we're going to cover what do force multipliers actually look like. It turns out it's not necessarily obvious if you try and design a typical standard cookie-cutter interview. You're going to get people that are not necessarily unusual. And you're looking for unusual people if they're going to be these force multipliers. We're also going to cover the obligatory, what do I do when people can use AI to cheat on everything? And the answer to that is actually, who cares? But we'll get into how that works. We're also going to talk about the really, really important thing of no matter how perfectly you design your interview loop, it's never done. So you need to iterate on it, you need to work on it, you need to debug, and we're going to go over how to do that and how that actually works for you. And also, because interviewing engineers and your company are all contextual, there's no way possible that you can just take this and copy and paste it, which is originally why I made this a PDF so that you couldn't. But that's fine. We'll go over it. So force multipliers and innovation. Because when we think about force multipliers, we often think about people that are innovative, and they bring these innovative solutions, and they have this, magical factor that you know when you see it, and other lies we tell ourselves. It turns out that there are a couple sort of factors that are actually based in some psychological research, as well as experimental and actual evidence empirically. And you can use those to determine people that are really, really good at doing this force multiplying thing. The first one is something called a cumulative culture. So cumulative culture comes from cognitive psychology. And what that means is, essentially, it takes and explains this concept of humans, where humans started off banging rocks together. And we can't do a whole lot of things in one human lifespan. And we're not super good at inventing things by making it out of thin air. But somehow, we went from banging rocks together to spaceships. How do we do that? And it turns out that humans are really, really good at copying and mimicking and doing incremental change on top of that. And humans are really good at working together. And so one of the huge ways to have force multipliers is people that create and facilitate these cumulative cultures. Because the cumulative culture is that environment of, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, I'm going to work on top of that. Oh, I'm going to mix this, and I'm going to contribute, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to share that, let's work on this together. And before you know it, you've built a rocket ship out of your really cool couple ideas and your whiteboards and your sort of wild brainstorming, and you turn that into an actual team. And that cumulative culture is sort of the ingredient behind how you do that. But also, people who are force multipliers typically do not tend to be brilliant assholes. They might be brilliant, but the asshole part makes it really hard for people to like them. And so if you look at someone who is really, really good at learning, who's really, really good at contributing to things, and most importantly, is really, really fundamentally good at never, ever losing sight of the fact that everyone can know something that they don't. If they're open-minded, if they're able to be accepting of new answers and contribute and be humble, what does that look like? And it turns out the answer for that is intellectual humility. You can also call it, being a nice person or whatever you want to, but if you look at intellectual humility, you'll actually find specific measures that are really hard to gain, and those are great. But then when we talk about force multipliers, we're not necessarily talking about people in isolation, because you can't just be a genius in a room somewhere and then be a force multiplier for your whole organization. That doesn't work. Organizations are contextual. So these people need to work in context, which means they need to respect and appreciate and love the context and have this deep fascination for understanding it. And that is this kind of concept called ecological awe. It's kind of, how I like to explain it is, if I'm looking for a force multiplier, I look for people who love to garden. Because gardeners are not necessarily optimizing for, amount of food per square meter. They're not optimizing for, how quickly can they grow the flower. They balance the ecosystem. They love the ecosystem. They respect it. They'll tell you, oh, these are planted over here because they like the sunlight. These are planted over here because they don't. This one's a finicky little bitch and keeps dying on me, and that's fine, but I fixed it. But you respect the ecosystem, and you have this notion and balance of it. And those types of people tend to be extraordinarily good at finding the weird interdependencies in your organization, understanding them and unraveling them and pulling them out and nurturing them. You really want those people. So that's the secret. Go hire people to do that. Okay, but how do you do that? It turns out that there's also this kind of complicating factor where so much of our interviews are designed around questions that are explicit knowledge and questions that are specifically sort of this frozen sort of encyclopedic knowledge. And the problem with that is if you have a giant, random stochastic noise-generating parrot that's really good at faking Wikipedia, you're going to get people that are really good at faking Wikipedia-like answers and sounding like they know everything. And so what do you do? How do you hire force multipliers if people sound like they know everything? The way to do it is to change the question. If the question has an answer, people can fake it. So I ask questions that can't be answered. Because it turns out, if you as a person have this intellectual humility, if you have this ecological awe, and you have this ability to understand the system, the ability to work well with people, the ability to take them and create this collaborative culture, the last thing on my mind is, oh, but did you use AI to answer the question? And if you did use AI and you faked it, well, good, keep faking it. I'm going to hire you. Keep faking it for the next 5 years. Brilliant, perfect. So change the question and make it something that can't be gained, because it becomes something that demonstrates the skills together, and that when you're working together with them, you'll get the answer that you need. If you hate working together with them, it doesn't matter if they use AI or not. If you love working with them, it doesn't matter if they use AI or not, right? Cool, but let's make this a bit practical. So when you're writing a better interview, you have kind of 3 steps. You have to experiment. You have to try it out. Often on your own team, everyone skips that part. But you should also try it out on your own team. Look, again, for those factors that are impossible to game. And most importantly, for force multipliers, you need signals that show regardless of socioeconomic status. And there's a specific reason for that. And it's not just because you should. You should, but there's also reasons for this. It turns out that social cognition shows up very, very differently based on the socioeconomic background you grew up in. This is not, a black and white rule. It's not saying it's going to be this way, but these factors heavily contribute to it. If you are from a marginalized environment, you will probably favor demonstrating social cognition via the cultural process. If you're from a privileged background, you will typically tend to favor it via a technical process. One way to sort of demonstrate this in sort of a very straightforward way is, the stereotype of men just like to solve the problem and women like to just talk to people about it and then the problem magically goes away? That's that type of demonstration in practice. So if you design your interview loop to only look for people that solve the problem by throwing tools, by throwing code, by throwing anything else at it, it doesn't matter how well your interview is designed. It is selecting for people that grew up in a privileged background, and a couple weird exceptions. But you're not supposed to be selecting for privileged background. You're supposed to be selecting for force multipliers. And so you should make the things that you're selecting for accurate to what you're looking for. Impact requires technical and cultural problem-solving skills. So you can't over-index and swing the other way. Because then you end up with people that are really, really good at talking and can't actually help you implement it. If you swing way on the other way, you end up with people who are the billion tassels and they're really good at hammering out the code and they hate talking to people. And they're not good at working with anyone. So you can't have the extremes, you need both. We do live in a very biased and sort of systemically unfair and systemically structured environment. So the equilibrium is probably slanted pretty hard towards measuring cultural process. You're going to need to overcompensate for that so that people feel safe demonstrating that and bringing that on into the interview. Which then comes into, so how do I design the interview so that people who can demonstrate cultural process will do it? So this is the part where I took all of you, where Laura was super organized because she's brilliant and amazing. She had a little paper for people. I'm going to pretend that my inability to give you a handout is for the environment. So I saved paper. So I want you to think about this. We're going to take your favorite system design interview. And I want you to write it down, or maybe think about it in your head if you're cool like that. Jot your notes on your phone. And I'm going to go through a system design interview, and I'm going to debug it. I'm going to iterate on it. I'm going to fix it. And I'm going to think out loud. And while I'm doing that, I want you to work with me on this. And we're going to work together through this and figure out how this works and how we can do this thing better. Cool? So here's the question I'm going to come up with, and I want you to have your own question, the one you use in your interview loop, the one that you like, the one that's your favorite. So the question that I'm going to use is, how would you approach splitting a monolith? And I'm definitely not using this question because the last people that interviewed me with it did it very badly.
I hope you're enjoying this video, but did you know Lead Dev has a lot more to offer?
When I think about Lead Dev, I think about bricks and hearts. Bricks are those foundational things that you need to know, and Lead Dev provides that through webinars, through videos, through cutting-edge research. But hearts are the things that you need to glue yourself to the people at work. And Lead Dev does that through conferences and meetups.
Make sure you check out leaddev.com.
Definitely not. But I happen to like this question for no reason. So, you have, how would you approach splitting a monolith? The first thing that I do with a question like this is I don't immediately try and sit down and write the question correctly. I first say, what do these good signals look like? So I want to know the culture side, and I want to know the technical side. And I want, for each one, write down what a really, really good positive indicator is. How do I know they're demonstrating that cultural process aptitude? And for each one, you also want to say, how do I know they are not demonstrating that? So that way, I know what follow-up questions to ask. If they're not demonstrating that, I can go right in and say, basically, hey, can you demonstrate that you know the cultural process? You're not indicating that. And showing what the negative and positive looks like helps avoid situation you might run into where you and your team's culture have indexed so specifically on certain indicators that you lose the actual signal for the indicator. Like, for example, some people really love collaboration and think that collaboration is using the word we a lot. And so they will actually fail engineers in their interview if they don't use the word we enough. However, women, if they use the word we, are not assertive enough. If they use the word I too much, are assholes and are arrogant. And so you can actually win. And so picking language as a choice to show whether or not people know how to do a thing is also going to, be really problematic for English as a second language people and a whole other host of problems. But how do you know you're doing this? Write down the positive and the negative. It'll really, really help you, especially if you have this why. When the why runs into these issues during the actual interview process, you can start going, oh, I thought I knew why this was a positive indicator, but I really, really like this person, and I can't put my finger on it, but they don't show this in the way that I thought they did. And now you can debug it. And you can iterate, and you can improve it. So here's my answer. And for brevity, I'm going to show just the cultural side. For my answer for the cultural approach, here's how I would start to think about writing it down. I might say, okay, so for the cultural approach of splitting the monolith, okay, I want to think of, people over process, people scale process. How do we get people working together? What are the problems you run into? Okay, let me think. You have this. So the ways of working need to be designed so that the monolith splitting can happen. How do I teach teams work collaboratively? That's super important. And you need to identify potential, services. I'm not going to do that by, code analysis. I'm going to do that by figuring out the teams and what they actually work on and using that to split it. And these are all ways to approach the problem that don't necessarily involve writing code, but they're just as impactful as doing the database migration and a bunch of feature flagging and all the other fancy things. But we tend to only talk about that part. But these are equally valid. And so I might go for the positive indicator and say, one positive indicator, there might be many. One positive indicator would be, communication barriers. Why? Communication barriers are probably the thing that stops the monolith from being split successfully most often. I might be wrong on that, but that's what I'm going with. For the negative indicator, I might say, hey, so the teams are going to work around the process of enhanced productivity. So if someone starts talking about this cultural process, these cultural processes, and they say, yes, people do it with this process. We're going to have everybody adopt Agile. We're going to have everybody adopt this. We're going to have everybody do all these other things. We're going to split it all out. And we're going to, event storm and throw a couple domain-driven design buzzwords in there. And I'm like, okay, but why? And they can't articulate that. Now I'm going to think about that, because if you design a broken process, people work around it. Again, I could be wrong, but that's my theory. You just write something down, and you work on it. So now that I have these sorts of things written down, I need to think about what are some of the biases that I inherit in my culture, in the environment, at the location, geographically, that I'm hiring for. What are some of these things? And I'm going to try and guess how overcompensating I need to hit in order to get that, neutral. So like in a tech environment, if I'm hiring for a senior engineers tend to split roughly in most tech companies, 80-20 demographically. So I might want to go, maybe 75% cultural, somewhere around there, wiggle it. For engineering leaders, director and higher, women are about, 9 to 15% demographically. So I might want to swing even harder that way. So that's, how I might think about it. Or if I'm looking at, certain other types of demographics, how do I compensate for that? How do I maybe really, really make sure that English as a second language people are not affected? Would be really important, for example, if I'm hiring a remote team in India to work with us. They have to know English. It's probably not their first language. If I design an interview that requires them to know the nuance between there, and there, I'm setting them up for failure. So then I go, okay, you'll take the question, how would you approach splitting the monolith? And I'm going to think about, in this case, I'm thinking about how do I take that gender disparity and start to move it over, and that disadvantaged and marginalized background, and start to equalize for it. And so I know that I need to overemphasize the cultural aspect. So rather than just saying, how would you split it? And then letting the conversation go where it goes. If I do that, they're just going to start talking about the tech. Even the people that are the cultural, even the people that lean for that and look for that, they know every time I do this, I fail the interview. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to mask that. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to talk about the tech first. So I need to introduce that vulnerability so people can actually showcase what excellence looks like in that area. So I'm going to say, let's work together and examine the process of splitting a monolith. And how would I approach this culturally and technically? There's the whole spectrum. I need both of these. But we're going to start with the human elements first. And when I say human elements, I mean human elements, not the process as a religion, not the process as a process for the sake of process to do process. I'm saying human elements. And so I'm giving all these cues and indicators and, dropping things in there and sprinkling it in there and sort of giving them the shape of what they are allowed to express so that they can actually come in and give the interview answer, and we can have the right type of conversation, and I can get the signals that I'm looking for. Once I've got the signals, I'm not done. I'm sorry, I'm not done yet, because you need to validate the signals. It's not enough for the signals to just be gathered. At some point, you need to double-check your work. You really have to double-check your work, particularly when you're hiring force multipliers, because these are usually the people that do not go cleanly into your career ladder. They are usually the people that do not cleanly map to the requirements for being promoted. These are usually the people that are impactful everywhere in the organization but on paper. So if I'm going to hire them, if I'm going to do this, I need to make sure that my signals are accurate, because sometimes they're going to be the only thing I can lean on to justify the continued existence of the company, and hopefully reframing the career ladder so that it's actually accurate to the work that's being done, and not just how people think the work should happen. So some possible signals of that. Do you have a really beautiful, diverse demographic of everybody talking to the recruiter and everybody talking to the hiring manager? And by the time you get to the technical interview, it's okay. And then after the technical interview, it's only white men. Happens so often. Or maybe everybody gets to the hiring stage and it's great, but you never ever actually give an offer to anyone other than a tall, slightly handsome-looking white dude. Again, happens super, super often. Do you primarily actually hand out the offers to things? Do your systems interview repeatedly weed out non-English speakers? Do your regretted hires follow a predictable pattern? I have experienced every single one of these at a company somewhere. At one point, we actually had a company where you could repeatedly and regularly hire a diverse crew of people as long as you were comfortable with the fact that everybody would eventually be fired for performance reasons unless they were a very specific skin color and had a certain type of hormone and maybe a beard. But as long as you're okay, you could hire anybody. You could hire anybody as long as you understood that all the women would be kicked out eventually. That's not great. So I need to validate these signals. And if some of these signals are outside of the reach of your ability to influence them. It's like I have been in organizations where senior or maybe even staff engineer and lower, I can keep them around as long as I want to. But the principal engineers, I no longer have control over their tenure as much as I want to. And so sometimes I need to go, this person is going to be a brilliant hire, but I'm setting them up for trauma, failure, disappointment, and a riff. Because not a single principal engineer in this company has lasted longer than a year unless they are men. Maybe don't hire women principal engineers until you fix that. And that's a really uncomfortable question to have, but validating your signals helps you get there. And then that helps you have a really productive conversation with your HR people and say, hey, is this problematic? And if they say no, then you can leave and find somewhere else that's less stupid. So again, also, finally, we iterate. We've gone to the end, we've taken the question, we've improved the question, we've figured out some signals, we validated, we tried it on some people who we hired them, we measured it, and now we keep going. And you keep going, and you keep going, and you iterate on it, and you constantly improve it. One mistake that I see people make sometimes is they have the feast and famine approach to hiring, which is, they go, we have 50 headcount in 2 weeks. Let's go. And oh, we're not going to hire again for like 5 more years. That's fine. And then by the time you need to hire again, you've completely forgotten how to do it, and you just start all the way over. Again, maybe you have a whole lot of headcount. Spread it out if you can. Or even if you can't spread it out, you can do this really cool thing called you can run the hiring process on your own team. Because it turns out, if you have a known success variable, if you go, this person is what high impact looks like in my organization, they should be able to pass the interview without any prep cold. Right? 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 How many of you have worked at a company where you're like, oh, I'm so glad I passed that interview because there's absolutely no way in hell I could pass it again without studying for 5 months? I've known so many people like that. That's a really bad place to be. So remember, 10x engineers don't exist, but engineers that help build 10 times healthier teams do. And I'm looking for these engineers, and I'm thinking of force multipliers. I am not multiplying myself. They should not be multiplying themselves. they are multiplying the team, which means they have to be really, really good at this distributed cognition, at this ability to take the collective ways of working of the entire team and make it better, happier, and healthier for everyone together. Thank you very much.